Welcome to Abyssal, Murmurs, where eerie and spine-chilling ghost stories rise from the haunting darkness, leading you on a bone-chilling journey. Haunted Boarding House, a horror story. Author, Bram Stoker. Sitting at a roadside tea stall, sipping my coffee, I watched the bustling crowd pass by. This had become a regular thing for me, given that my job was a market representative, essentially a salesman. I had to constantly move between dealers, pitching products, receiving feedback, and handling issues. As I was pondering how to meet my sales target for the month, a familiar voice suddenly broke into my thoughts. Spending the day here again? Must be nice. Just sitting around, sipping coffee all day and getting paid at the end of the month. You've got it made. Turning around, I saw Andrew, an old friend from high school. His job was similar to mine. He worked as a sales rep for a well-known telecommunications company. That's why we often hung around at these roadside stalls. I spent more time chatting with him than I did with my own wife. I teased him, enjoying life as much as you. Off to work in the morning with your fancy umbrella. Back in the evening, always rolling in money. I can't keep up with you. He sat down, ordered an iced tea, and immediately glued his eyes to his phone. I did the same. Every now and then, we'd look up and exchange a few words. But if one of us was busy, it might take a few minutes to get a reply. We each worked in our own fields, but one thing we had in common was a love for ghost stories. He loved reading them, and I loved writing them. He had read nearly everything I'd written, and it seemed to match his taste. After a while, with nothing else to talk about, I asked, "Hey, have you finished reading the story about the god I just wrote? What did you think?" This time, his hands were free, so he answered, "I read it all. It's pretty normal. You should find true stories to write. Reading them would be more thrilling. It's all just fictional stuff, like historical dramas, so unrealistic." I felt a bit disappointed, but still tried to smile. Well, who doesn't know that fear comes from having a vice? But I've never seen a ghost, so how would I know how to write about it? Upon hearing this, he pulled his chair closer, looking at me intently. I'll tell you a story, but it's something I experienced myself. Even now, thinking back on it still scares me. I was surprised, only thinking about silly ghost stories. Really? Did you see it with your own eyes, or hear someone else tell it? He affirmed firmly, "I told you, it's something I went through myself." "So, do you want to hear it?" I clicked my tongue. "All right, give it a try." I'm currently collecting true ghost stories to write about here. Sipping his tea, he began telling the story. At first, I wasn't really paying attention, distracted by the noise of passing vehicles and the loud chatter around us. But after a while, my eyes widened, and I found myself hanging on his every word. When a call from a customer came in, I ignored it, not wanting to miss a single detail of the story. As I listened, chills crept up my spine. I'd heard plenty of ghost stories before, but they were all fictional, so they never scared me. But this time, I knew what he was saying was real. And the truth has a way of evoking a very different kind of fear. When the story ended, I was still shaken. I couldn't believe something so horrifying could happen in real life. Glancing at my phone, I suddenly remembered I had several important meetings with clients that day. I quickly stood up, said goodbye, and rode away, haunted by the story he had shared. I decided to write down this supernatural tale to share it with all of you, my dear listeners. Coming from a true rural family, Andrew's background wasn't very well off, but he had been notorious for his mischievous behavior since childhood. Naturally intelligent, he he still managed to get good grades despite his playful nature. After graduating from high school, he was accepted into Colorado Technical University with a fairly high score. However, after a year, he requested a department transfer, causing him to graduate a year later than his peers. In 2015, he graduated and quickly secured a job with a pretty good salary, enough to live comfortably. But the job was demanding in terms of time and required him to work far from home. After just a year, he quit and moved back to his hometown. His father, Mr. Mendel, scolded him so much that Andrew nearly became depressed. His mother, on the other hand, was the opposite, loving and gently advising him. With no job, Andrew spent his days wandering around, glued to his phone playing games. That day, while he was in the middle of Arena of Valor match, Eric, his old college roommate, called him. "Hey, how's it going these days?" Andrew sighed. "I'm so bored, just drifting around at home. There's nothing to do." "I thought you were still working at the construction site in Denver." "I've been on leave for over a month now. The pay was good there, but it felt as confining as prison, really boring." "Have you found a job yet?" "Not yet." "If you have a lead on a taxi job for me, let me tag along. It feels so humiliating living off my parents." "Then it's good. Come to Texas with me. My cousin and I are supervising a project here. He has to go home soon, and I don't know who else to look for." Andrew thought for a moment and replied, "I'll catch a bus there tomorrow morning." Indeed, the next afternoon, Andrew arrived. Eric welcomed him and took him to their rented room. The room was not much different from a student dorm, just lacking the thick textbooks. Eric handed Andrew a chilled lemonade. "Hey, drink this to ease your tiredness." "What time did you leave this morning?" Andrew gulped it down in one go and said, "I woke up at 5:30, took 2 rides to get here, and I am completely worn out." Eric laughed. "Back in university, you were tough as nails. How come you're feeling weak now?" Andrew replied, "I'm older now. It's totally different." Eric joked, "All right, sit back and relax. I'll run to the market to buy some food for us to drink." Andrew smiled. "Make sure to buy some good stuff." After that, Eric zoomed off on his bike, leaving Andrew in the dorm room. Looking around, Andrew noticed that this dorm was near Texas Economics University, probably about 50-60 rooms, mostly occupied by students. Not only that, but he also saw middle-aged people and even a family with small children in the opposite room. Andrew guessed they were likely workers or employed by a nearby factory or business. After observing for a while, Andrew stepped back into his room, unlocked his backpack, and took out a washcloth. Next, Andrew walked straight to the water area, rinsed his face, and attended to his personal hygiene. Noticing that Andrew was a stranger, some people scrutinized him, but no one spoke up. Andrew was aware of it, but simply nodded and smiled. Immediately, out of politeness, the others nodded in return. In lodging areas like this, it was nothing unusual for strangers to come and go. They were merely cautious of the police, thieves, or drug users. However, upon closer inspection, it was clear that Andrew was not like those others, so everyone felt a bit more at ease. As they stepped into the house, they coincidentally spotted Eric riding his bike back, a smile on his face, holding up a white bottle and winking. Having been with him for several years, Andrew knew exactly what that bottle contained. "I can't believe it. I haven't touched this stuff in ages. And in the middle of the day like this, how am I supposed to get anything done if I drink?" Eric reached out to grab the bag of food hanging from his bike and replied with a grin, "Don't worry. I'm taking the whole day off to cater to you. We can just party until we're completely worn out and then crash until the evening." Shortly after, each person brought one leg and one arm to set a lavish meal neatly in the middle of the living room on a mat. They hadn't even taken a bite of food yet, and the two of them had already clinked glasses and downed 3 full shots of sweet, syrupy rice wine. Andrew was still exhausted from the strong liquor Eric had brought, so after just 3 glasses, he immediately felt the urge to throw up, his head spinning. Quickly, he ladled a bowl of broth and drank it down in an attempt to sober up. "What's going on? Feeling weak these days? What kind of crazy liquor did you buy? It's so harsh. Awful stuff. I bought it at the duck shop down the street. The guy swore it was authentic Colorado corn liquor. I was confident enough to drink a lot doesn't give you a headache. Just sleep it off, and you'll wake up fresh as a daisy, ready to take on the world," Eric said, pouring more from the bottle. Andrew quickly stopped him. "No, let's just take it easy for lunch. We'll drink more tonight. I'm feeling terrible right now. Let me eat something first." With that, he scooped some rice into his bowl, poured broth over it, and started shoveling it down. Across from him, Eric chuckled to himself, amused by the scene. "Geez, eat slower. You look like someone who hasn't eaten in days." "Well, I practically am starving. Rushed out this morning without eating anything. I've been feeling like my stomach's in knots, and then downing those 3 shots, it burned my throat like fire. It's unbearable." Eric chuckled and kept pouring more liquor. They drank a few more shots before finally starting to eat. Back in their university days, Andrew always outdrank Eric, but after just a few years apart, Eric now easily outpaced him. Once they finished eating, the two collapsed onto the bed and slept straight through until evening. The dishes were left scattered around, unwashed and forgotten. When they woke up, they quickly showered and headed out to the duck shop for dinner. They shared countless stories, laughing and reminiscing about their college days, then trading experiences about their lives after graduation and work. After talking for hours, they finally dragged themselves back to their room and slept through until morning. The next day, Eric took Andrew to the construction site, giving him an overview so that Andrew could grasp the situation here. Being in the same profession and having 2 years of practical experience, he quickly got a handle on everything. This is a mini supermarket project, and the construction is entering the finishing stage. There aren't many concerns left. They just need to finalize the electrical system and the decorative lighting around before it can be handed over. That's why Eric had the free time yesterday to stay home all day to be with Andrew. In fact, he had his own agenda in calling Andrew here. He has rooted himself in this place and hasn't returned home for almost a year now. A few days from now, there's a holiday, and he wants to take the opportunity to visit home for a few days. So after being here for 2 days, Andrew still hadn't gotten to know many people, but he was particularly interested in the room at the end of the hall, which belonged to 2 freshman girls. The other day, he saw the girls going out to wash dishes and pretended to casually strike up a conversation. He learned that their names were Ariel and Bella, both from Texas. Bella was petite, with long hair, fair skin, and a charming face, but she spoke very little and seemed reluctant to interact with strangers. In contrast, Ariel appeared more confident. Though not as pretty and a bit heavy-set, she was cheerful and easy to approach. However, Andrew's preference leaned towards Bella. After several days of pretending to buy fruits and snacks to come visit, Andrew finally managed to get Bella's phone number and Facebook account. Each evening, Eric would often catch him quietly texting, sometimes chuckling to himself. A quick glance was enough to see exactly who he was messaging. "Wow, really? You've got her hooked." "Not yet. She's just a first year, so she's still pretty shy. I'm taking it slow, just testing the waters for now. But what about you and Adele? Are you two still in touch? Ever since we graduated, we broke up. She landed a great stable job in New York, and I'm down in Florida for work. We just didn't have time to see each other, and the feelings faded. In the end, we went our separate ways. Eric wasn't too surprised, knowing that few college relationships actually lasted. He chuckled and added, "Who knows? Maybe when you get back, you'll catch a big one. Don't forget to thank me if that happens." "Yeah, right. Let's wait and see what happens first. We've only exchanged a few casual texts. Still a long way to go." Eric was silent for a moment before changing the subject. "Oh, by the way, I'm heading back to my hometown for a few days soon. Keep an eye on things for me at work, will you?" Andrew circled around the topic. "This is the third time you've told me. I know already. The project is almost done anyway. Don't worry, take the whole month off if you want. I'm just reminding you. I don't want you getting caught up in romance and neglecting work. It'd be my head on the line." "I got it. You're nagging more than my own mom." When I first enrolled in college, I was nervous. 2 days later, Eric officially caught the bus back to his hometown. That evening, when Andrew came back from work, he felt a bit down. The energy in the apartment was gone, nothing like the lively days before. Every room was locked up and silent. Since it was the holiday, everyone had gone home, even Bella and Ariel from the last room. After dinner, Andrew climbed into bed, pulled up the blanket, and started texting Bella. But she had probably been out all day or was busy with something back home, as there was no reply for quite some time. Feeling bored, Andrew scrolled through Facebook, mindlessly browsing until late into the night. Even though he wasn't much of a soccer fan, tonight was the Euro final between Portugal and France, so he decided to stay up and watch it. However, the match didn't start until 1 a.m. and by 10 p.m., his eyes were already drooping. He tried to push through for another 30 minutes, but couldn't take it anymore. He set an alarm on his phone, pulled up the blanket, turned off the lights, and went to bed early. Just after midnight, the outside was calm when suddenly a strong wind kicked up, followed by loud claps of thunder. A few moments later, the sound of raindrops began to drum steadily on the roof. The rain gradually slowed, occasionally interrupted by bursts of lightning. Out of nowhere, a deafening clap of thunder crashed down, jolting Andrew awake from his half-asleep state. Groggily, he grabbed his phone and saw that it was only 12:30. He rubbed his eyes, yawned a few times, and opened his Facebook messages to check for any replies. Its mouth gently curled into a smile as a surge of joy filled its heart, for it saw that Bella had replied to the message. It turned out that she had gone over to her cousin's house to play since early evening, leaving her phone at home, so she hadn't seen the text. It wondered to itself whether she was still awake at this hour. It intended to text and ask, but ultimately thought better of it. After all, the final match was about to start soon, so it decided to stay awake. Suddenly, it felt a chill, probably because the temperature had dropped significantly after the rain. It pulled the blanket up to its chest, but after a moment, it still felt cold, so it turned off the fan. Outside, the sound of the rain kept drumming on, unrelenting. Out of nowhere, a sound of giggling floated into Andrew's ears, as if someone were playing with a child. Following that was the voice of a woman interspersed with the sound of the rain. Those sounds emerged so unexpectedly from the darkness of the night, causing Andrew to freeze in shock. It strained its ears to listen, and soon after, There was the sound of running thuds on the bed, along with the fan whirring softly, resembling the presence of a mother. The rain was so heavy that he couldn't hear what the person was saying clearly. He began to feel scared, and goosebumps suddenly covered his skin. Clearly, at dusk, he saw that the entire row of rental rooms had gone quiet, so where were those sounds coming from? Moreover, in the midst of such a stormy night, what children would be playing and running around like that? The more he thought about it, the more frightened Andrew became. But suddenly he remembered that opposite his room, Beatrice's family also had a son. However, it was a boy, and just now the laughter he heard was definitely from a girl. As he was lost in thought, a sudden cry made Andrew's heart jump. The cry was so clear, and then a woman's voice rose up, as if trying to comfort the little girl. After a while, he even heard lullabies that sounded very eerie. At this point, he was scared to the point of losing all color in his face and mustered all his courage to get up when the power went out. The sounds immediately stopped. He stood still by the light switch, listening intently for a long time but heard nothing. Looking up through the window to glance into Sister Beatrice's room, it noticed that the outside was still tightly locked, which only heightened its fears. If the sounds from earlier were from a child in that room, there would still be a bit of hope for belief. However, now it was sure that it wasn't the case. Suddenly, it remembered a room right next to its own. Since it arrived, that door had remained locked without ever being opened. A few times, it had asked Eric, but he just shook his head in confusion. He said he had been here for nearly a year, and that room still had no one in it, even though it saw many people come asking for lodgings. Yet, Clarice, the landlord, always said there were no rooms available. Once, when it inquired, Clarice simply stated that room was in severe disrepair and she hadn't had the time to fix it, so no one was allowed to stay there. Hearing this reasoning from Eric, it found it utterly unreasonable because the cost of repairs couldn't be that high, while the rent here was over $100 a month. She had left the room vacant for such a long time, it made no sense. However, at that moment, Andrew did not press further. He just nodded and accepted it, then forgot all about it. But he thought that with the light of the electric bulb, all the strange and eerie occurrences would come to an end. Yet, that was not the case. Just a moment later, the terrifying sounds of the mother and child from before echoed in Andrew's ears once more. His room and the adjacent one were designed with a partition, leaving a large opening for the air conditioner, so it was not completely sealed off. Looking up at that gap, Andrew noticed something vague and smoky drifting from the next room into his. The more it flowed over, the more it disturbed him. When it reached his nose, Andrew realized it was the smell of incense, which only amplified his fear. Even though he did not want to believe it, he had to acknowledge the truth at that moment. The sounds he was hearing were definitely not human. His body felt weak, his limbs trembling uncontrollably. Suddenly, he remembered his mother telling him as a child that urine and garlic could ward off evil spirits. Without hesitation, he unzipped his pants and relieved himself right there on the floor, splattering urine all over the ground near the door. Not feeling reassured yet, he hastily grabbed a few cloves of garlic and stuffed them into his clothes before dashing to his bed, pulling the blanket tightly over himself. If there had been anyone in the room at that moment, he surely would have screamed at the top of his lungs. However, it knew that in the middle of such a stormy night, even if it screamed its throat raw, no one would come. After a while, growing too scared, it reached into its backpack, took out the headphones, plugged them into the phone, and turned the music up full blast. Yet, strangely, despite that, the sounds continued to echo in its ears in a mysterious and horrifying way. Indeed, it had never experienced such a frightening thing in its life. With each passing second, it felt like its nerves were being tortured, each breath and heartbeat becoming heavier and more difficult. If this continued, it would surely faint in no time. It took a risk and threw a pillow forcefully towards the kitchen, causing pots and pans to clatter wildly. It seemed that the mother and child in that house heard it too, as they fell silent once again. Andrew, seeing it had an effect, decided to push his luck further. What on earth was making such a racket in the middle of the night? Did they intend to keep anyone from sleeping? Would they shut up or not? Just as those words left his mouth, he heard the whimpering cries of a small child. However, this time, he no longer heard the woman soothe the frightened child. He lay still, anxiously waiting. Suddenly, there was a tapping sound at the front door, as if someone was knocking, which made it jump in fright. Who is it? Who is out there? Just after mowing the lawn by the door, it strangely made its heart want to leap into its throat. Luckily, after 4 knocks, it could no longer hear anything. But right after that, the room next door echoed with the voice of a woman soothing her child, making it scared to death. After a while, the little girl quieted down, and it continued to play, then flitted around the house, making noises that rattled and thumped just like before. The wisps of incense smoke drifted more and more, until Andrew's room seemed to be enveloped in a thick fog. Still, it pulled the blanket tightly around itself, not daring to poke its head out to breathe. Tonight truly was an unforgettable nightmare in its life. Around 4 a.m., those haunting experiences finally came to a complete stop. At that moment, Andrew seemed to regain its senses. It lowered the blanket and tried to take a deep breath to catch some air, feeling utterly miserable. Hair soaked, face pale and gray, eyes glazed over and reddened, full of exhaustion. However, it still didn't dare to open the door and step outside, waiting until the sound of cars and the clattering of vendors filled the alley before it removed the blanket and got out of bed. Although it was morning now, Andrew couldn't understand why he felt a chill down his spine when he glanced at the room next door. After changing into a different outfit, he hurried out to the water basin to brush his teeth and wash his face. As he passed by the window, he suddenly heard the soft laughter of a child unexpectedly echoing from within. He jumped back in fright, his gaze fixated on that spot. However, at that moment, he couldn't hear anything anymore. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief, regaining his composure. He rushed towards the water basin, trying to make everything as quick as possible. Looking at the restroom, tucked away at the far end of the dormitory, Andrew felt a chill run through him. If he just needed to go for a light pit stop, he would have relieved himself right at the water basin and called it a day. But strangely enough, he was feeling the pressure to go number 2. Pressing his eyes shut, he took cautious steps toward the restroom. Since it was hidden away in the corner, it appeared very dimly lit, and the sunlight couldn't reach it at that time. As he walked, Andrew held his breath, his eyes darting nervously around, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. If he spotted anything unusual, he would immediately turn and run. When Andrew arrived, he pulled open the bathroom door and was met with a scene of sheer horror. In the corner of the room stood a woman entirely dressed in white. Her hair was long and hung down, obscuring her face and trailing all the way to the floor in tangled clumps. In her arms, she held a child, its skin as pale as chalk, with eyes consisting only of the whites and a ghostly, unsettling smile. The fear Andrew experienced was indescribable. His heart felt as though it was about to burst out of his chest. He let out a scream as if being tortured, turned, and ran headlong into the door, crashing down. With no strength left to lock the door, he dashed outside, fleeing to where people were bustling about. It was only when he saw the busy crowd that he felt a sense of relief, realizing he was still alive. Even as he recalled the horrifying scene, he continued to shiver uncontrollably. He sat there for nearly an hour, and only when he had calmed down did he cautiously return to his apartment. He quickly locked the door, jumped onto Eric's bike, and revved the engine to speed away. Still shaken, he decided to call Eric and pulled out his phone. After a moment, Eric answered. "Hello, Eric." "Yeah, it's me. Why are you calling so early? Is there any problem with the construction work?" "No, everything's fine at that site. I just wanted to ask you something, but you have to promise to tell the truth." "What's the matter that's got you so worked up?" "All right, just tell me. While you were staying at the apartment, did you notice anything strange?" "Strange? Did a thief break in last night? Or did some addicts come by begging?" "No, not that. I mean, did you hear any unusual sounds or phenomena while you were sleeping?" "There weren't any unusual sounds. Maybe the neighbors were singing karaoke too loudly, and you couldn't sleep?" "No. I mean, did you hear a child crying or a woman's voice right next to your room?" "Oh, yes. Occasionally Beatrice's child cries at night. But it seems like Beatrice's family went back to their hometown yesterday." "That's exactly what I'm saying. I swear to you, last night in the room right next to mine, I heard a child and a woman playing together. Not only that, but this morning when I went to the bathroom, I saw a ghost with long hair. It was hanging loose and holding a child. Oh my God, you can't imagine how terrified I was. I swear, I've never experienced such a horrifying feeling. I was so scared. You should come here and see for yourself." "I'm not going back there." On the other end, Eric was getting goosebumps and, not believing what he was hearing, responded with a mocking tone. "Come on, stop watching so many horror movies. Maybe you were dreaming or just disoriented. There's no such thing as a ghost. I've lived here for a year and haven't seen anything." "Don't talk nonsense." I was so scared I nearly wet myself. If you don't believe me, come here and see for yourself. Anyway, I'm sure there's something wrong with the room next door. I'm not going back there. You really wet yourself, you bastard. Enough talk. Just come over today. Otherwise, I'm going back there and leaving you to deal with it." "All right, fine. I'll arrange to come over in the afternoon. In the morning, you just keep an eye on things for me." "Okay, remember to get here early." After that, they both hung up. I sat dazed for half an hour, only managing to eat half a plate of grilled pork. Once he was done, he left with a tired and listless expression to go supervise the construction site. By the afternoon, Eric arrived at the location. When he opened the door to the room, a strong, stinky odor hit him, making him sneeze repeatedly. Eric, furious, shouted, "Damn it, did you really piss in the house?" "I thought you were joking." "Joking? I swear, I'm telling the truth." "All right, just step over and clean up the place." The stench is unbearable. After cleaning up and arranging things, Eric's demeanor finally softened. He looked at Andrew with a serious expression. Andrew asked, "Did you really see a ghost last night?" "Damn it, what more do you need?" "I told you it was real." Although Eric didn't respond, he headed straight for the window of the neighboring room. Seeing this, Andrew panicked. "Hey, what are you planning to do?" Checking the window, of course. Let me see what's actually in that room, whether there's a ghost or demon, or if it's all just your imagination. This guy, are you crazy? The room is perfectly calm. Why are you running out like that? If Clarice, the landlady, finds out, you'll be in big trouble. What are you afraid of? This room doesn't have anyone in it. I bet there's barely any furniture inside. Plus, who's supposed to be here today to see it? Just shut up and let me do my thing. Eric pried the edge of the window wider, using the broom handle as a lever to push harder. Andrew had to admit, Eric was really reckless. Just watching made him gulp nervously. The sound of the metal scraping resonated sharply, while Eric's face turned bright red. Layers of dust that had settled on the window flew out with the wind, mingled with a musty smell from the room that had been unoccupied for a long time. Finally, the metal latch inside came loose, sending dust billowing into the air, making both of them quickly step back and grimace, waving their hands to clear the air. When the dust finally settled and they peered inside, Eric was momentarily stunned, dropping the broom he was holding in shock. At the same moment, Andrew also saw what was inside. In the far corner of the room, there was an altar set high up with two old, dusty eyes mounted on it, covered in black and red mold. Additionally, they saw a rotting old bed, and in the distant corner, a photo was hanging, but it was too faded to make out clearly. The room was enveloped in an extremely eerie and cold atmosphere, making Andrew shiver continuously just from standing at a distance. A cold draft ran down both their spines, causing goosebumps to rise all over them. Andrew couldn't bear to look any longer and quickly turned to flee back to the room, with Eric hastily following after him, closing each door behind them. Once back in the room, the two of them looked at each other in stunned silence. After a long while, Andrew finally mustered the courage to speak. "Did you see that? Now you're still saying I'm dreaming, huh? Yeah, I believe it now. It's just that I've been here for a long time. You just got here a few days ago and already encountered it. How come? I don't know. If you ask me, who should I ask? So what are you planning to do now? I'm not sleeping here tonight anymore. Okay, for now, let's just go out and have dinner. After that, we'll find a hotel to stay overnight, and we can figure things out tomorrow." That evening, after eating, the two shared a room at the nearby Springview Hotel. It was just that, in the rush earlier, Andrew had forgotten to bring his phone charger. He felt restless and couldn't stand it, so he turned to Eric. "Damn it, I forgot the charger back at the apartment. What do we do now?" "Well, you should just run back and get it." "Are you crazy? Even if you told me, I wouldn't dare go back alone. How about you come with me? You're such a pest, always nagging like a mouse." "Fine, I'll go with you." The two of them stepped outside and headed towards the apartment. Since it was close by, they decided to walk. After about 5 minutes, they arrived in front of the apartment door. Andrew occasionally glanced towards the window of the neighboring room, feeling a chill. Earlier, Eric hadn't shut the door completely, leaving a gap of about 3 inches. Peering into the darkness beyond, Andrew had the unsettling sensation that someone was watching him from inside. Overwhelmed with fear, he quickly averted his gaze and stepped into the apartment. After turning on the lights, he went over to the bedside and grabbed the charger. When he looked up at the air conditioning unit, he was startled. It seemed like he had just seen a pair of eyes peering from there. Not wanting to stay a moment longer, he hurriedly locked the door and pulled Eric back to the guest house. When they arrived, Eric asked, "What's with the reaction? Did you see something again?" "Yeah, I think I saw a pair of eyes on the wall near the air conditioner. They were watching me. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Tomorrow, I'll go over and give Clarice a piece of my mind. How dare she stay so close to that shrine for a whole year? After a sleepless night, Andrew quickly fell into a deep sleep, and Eric, after browsing on his phone, also slept soundly. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, the two of them went over to Clarice's house. Eric raised his voice right from the start. "Aunt Clarice, I have something to tell you." Aunt Clarice was washing a basin of water, seeing the two boys storm in. She was surprised. "What is it that early in the morning you two are making such a serious face at? By the way, this month you've brought in an extra person, so at the end of the month I'll need to collect a bit more for the water and the room, okay?" Eric replied, irritated. "Let's talk about that later. I want to ask you this. Why is the room next to my house a prayer room? When I asked you, you said it was deteriorating and wouldn't be rented out, but last night my friend was nearly scared to death by a ghost there." "Explain that." Aunt Clarice's face turned pale, her mouth stammering. "How did you two find out? Did you break in and try to steal something from there?" Eric retorted sharply. "Stop changing the subject. Answer my question first. Why did you deceive me?" Mrs. Clarice snapped back. "Oh, you two. If I told you that AI didn't deceive you about that room, then it's not my problem. If I don't want to rent to AI, that's my business, not yours. And as for the door breaking, I haven't even questioned you about that yet, but here you are trying to squeeze me. Fine, I'll make it easier for you if you don't want to stay here anymore. I'll refund your rent, and you can move somewhere else. Are you out of your mind? Move out if you want, but that's your own problem. As for the rent, I collect it quarterly, and I've already collected it, so there's no way to refund it. You decided to leave. I didn't kick you out. And if you want, you can call the police to come and sort this out. I'm not afraid." Eric, enraged, responded, "When we rented the room, you were all sweet and nice, but now you've turned hostile." "Fine, if that's how it is, I'll go back and tell everyone in the neighborhood about this. Let's see if anyone else will want to stay at your place." Mrs. Clarice realized that if word of this spread, it would severely impact her rental business. She quickly softened her tone. "Oh, don't do that. It'll ruin my reputation." "All right, let's talk this out calmly. What do you want to do now?" Eric demanded. "Hey, could you please give me back the rent for 2 months? This month, I could only stay for half the time, so just consider it a refund." Miss Clarice hesitated for a moment before agreeing. "All right, just stay right there and wait for me while I go inside the house to get the money." A little later, Mrs. Clarice came out from the house, counting the money as she walked. When she handed it to Eric, her face was long and sulky. "Here, count it and see if it's enough. Once you take the money, you better keep your mouth shut. If you keep talking, don't blame me." Eric accepted the money and said, "Yes, I'm a reasonable person. Well then, we'll go pack up our things. Goodbye." Ending the sentence, Eric turned away. Andrew still felt a bit curious and troubled, trying to ask more. Mom, what do you actually worship inside that room?" Mrs. Clarice snapped. "What does that have to do with your family?" "I worship whatever I want. Leave me alone, you two useless brats." Seeing her attitude, Andrew didn't dare to ask more and hurriedly turned away. When they returned to the entrance of the boarding house, the two of them stopped by a tea shop to inquire. Mrs. Kyle, who had lived here since childhood, knew all about the surrounding events. However, when asked about the origin of the boarding room, she seemed hesitant and unwilling to speak. It wasn't until Andrew added to the conversation, recounting the night before when he encountered a ghost and the events that transpired, that she finally felt comfortable enough to share her thoughts. "If you really saw a ghost, I won't hide anything from you. Previously, this place was a maternity hospital. Back then, the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now, so it was common to hear about difficult childbirths where both the baby and sometimes the mother would die. It happened quite often. Only later, when the government redeveloped the area, did it become residential land. However, during the construction, they encountered many frightening supernatural occurrences. When Mrs. Clarice built the rental rooms, it was the same. People were so frightened that they left, and it wasn't until she invited a priest to perform a blessing that things settled down and she was able to run her business peacefully. The two of them listened, their skin crawling as they absorbed the story. After a while, they bade Mrs. Clarice farewell and quickly packed up their things to move elsewhere. About a week later, when Eric's cousin arrived, Andrew also returned to his hometown. Thus, his short-lived romance with Bella had ended before it even really began. In reality, Andrew had already accepted that there was no future for him and Bella, partly because she was only a first-year student and partly due to the distance between them. He hadn't considered a long-term relationship at all. That day, before heading home, he arranged to take her out for ice cream and then to the school's courtyard to chat and say goodbye. He did not know that Bella had actually started to really like him. That night, Bella cried until her eyes were swollen. However, the time they spent together and the moments they shared were too short, not enough to leave a significant mark on each other's hearts. So just a short time later, those memories and feelings of longing gradually faded away, leaving no trace behind. But it seemed that the strange and eerie events surrounding Andrew were not over yet. After Andrew got home, he encountered a strange and frightening situation. Every night he was paralyzed by sleep, feeling as if a child was sitting on his chest, making it impossible for him to move his arms and legs. But when morning came, everything would stop. He thought it would only last a day or two, but this condition persisted for an entire week. Out of fear and sleeplessness, he became emaciated and pale. Damn it! Evren's mother, seeing her son looking abnormal, asked, "Why do you look so pale lately? Always like someone who's lost their soul. Are you feeling unwell anywhere? We should go for a checkup." Andrew replied, "I'm just feeling normal. It's probably because I've been a bit restless lately. I'm fine. Don't worry about it, Mom." Mrs. Evren became more worried. "I've never seen you like this before. I remember it started after you came back from AGN. Did something happen during that time? Be honest with me." Andrew no longer held back and told his mother everything that had happened at the rental room. Mrs. Evren was deeply concerned. "Are you telling the truth? Is it really like that?" "Yes. Why would I lie?" Mrs. Evren continued. "Such a serious matter, and you didn't tell me. If I hadn't asked today, would you have kept quiet forever? All right, go get the car and take me to Mr. Zachary's place quickly. I think you might be haunted, my child." Andrew nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The mother and son quickly changed clothes and headed straight to Mr. Zachary's house. As soon as they arrived, Mr. Zachary looked directly at Andrew and said, "This one is being followed by 2 spirits. They're standing outside the door right now." Mrs. Evren and Andrew felt a chill run down their spines, filled with fear. "Is that true, teacher?" What do you see? Tell me right away. Two spirits, one old and one young. The two of them, mother and child, are staring at me intently. Mrs. Everin pleaded, "Please, teacher, perform a ritual to free my son from the spirits. He has been haunted day and night for more than 10 days now. But if this continues, he will be in deep trouble, teacher." Teacher Zachary replied, "Oh dear, I understand. You don't need to say much. Boy, kneel down here so I can perform the ritual to exorcise the spirits." Mrs. Everin pulled Andrew's hand, and the two of them knelt down before the altar of Master Zachary. Master Zachary took out 3 coins and cast them onto the plate in front of him. As the coins landed, Master Zachary's expression changed, and he turned to Mrs. Everin. "These two spirits are not easy to deal with. They are connected to your son and will follow him from the underworld back to here." Hearing this, both Mrs. Everin and Andrew were taken aback. Master Zachary seemed to have witnessed everything firsthand. Mrs. Everin pleaded, "I beg you, please help me with everything. I only have this son, and if anything happens to him, I don't think I can survive. I hope you can do your best to help. Whatever it costs, just let me know, and we will manage it all." Mr. Zachary responded, "Of course, I will help, but I can only promise to do my best. I can't guarantee success." Mr. Zachary began the ritual. Holding a staff in one hand and flipping through a book with the other, he chanted softly. After a while, Andrew began to feel a chill down his spine, his body twitching, his eyes rolling back, and his face becoming expressionless. Occasionally, he would laugh maniacally, which was very disturbing. Mrs. Everin was frantic. Mr. Zachary said, "Stay calm. There's nothing to worry about. It's just the girl's spirit possessing him. Now, what do you want? Should I give you a feast, and then you and your mother will leave this boy alone and stop haunting him?" Mr. Zachary approached the altar, took a handful of sticky rice and several packets of cakes. Andrew's eyes were fixated on the plate of rice before it was even set down. He lunged for it, stuffing handfuls of rice into his mouth, grinning in a disturbingly unsettling way. Mrs. Everin, frightened, dared not act recklessly and only watched from the side. Andrew devoured the entire plate of rice in one go, sweeping up any scattered grains from the floor and shoving them into his mouth, chewing loudly. He then tore into the cakes with ravenous intensity, his mouth and face smeared with rice and crumbs, drool hanging from his chin. Finally, Mr. Zachary spoke. "Well, now that you've eaten your fill, can you leave this person's body?" Andrew, still not releasing his hold, replied, "No, not leaving, not leaving." Zachary's expression changed as he threatened Andrew with a few more words without any effect. He stepped up to Trung H&G's desk, pulled out a cane, and pointed it directly at Andrew's face, demanding, "So, are you going to come out or not? If you don't come out, I'll beat you to a pulp right now. Will you come out?" At that moment, Andrew was nervously glancing at the mulberry branch, shaking his head, his face clearly showing fear. When Andrew woke up, he felt tired and somewhat weak. His mother, Mrs. Everin, anxiously asked, "How are you? How do you feel, my son?" "Tell me," Andrew replied. "I'm awake now, but I feel very tired. The back of my neck feels a bit heavy." Mr. Zachary sighed in relief and said, "You can rest assured, I've given that ghost a good beating, and it certainly won't dare to keep haunting your son anymore. All right, you and your son can go home now." Mrs. Everin was overjoyed and took out $400 to perform a thank you ritual. However, Mr. Zachary only took 200 USD and returned the other 200 to her, saying, "This is enough for me. Now you two can head back." The two of them thanked him profusely and went home, thinking that everything was fine. But just a week later, the situation returned to how it was before. Andrew began having nightmares again and experienced sleep paralysis. Mrs. Everin was so worried that she couldn't eat or sleep, and Andrew became so thin that he looked like skin and bones. When they returned to seek Mr. Zachary's help again, he shook his head. "I have tried my best. If it still doesn't let go, then I have no other way." Miss Everin was advised by a relative that there was a large temple in the province, with a venerable high monk of great virtue and reputation as the abbot. The two of them set off to the temple, and as soon as they stepped into the courtyard, Andrew felt relieved and at ease. The sound of wooden clappers and the rhythmic chanting of sutras resonated in the air. Upon entering the main hall, they saw many people chanting, with nearly 10 monks, both large and small, standing in front, and the oldest master up top. The mother and son quietly knelt at the back, bowed 3 times, and waited. After the chanting session concluded, Miss Everin approached the master, joined her hands before her chest, and said softly, "Sir, I respectfully greet you. May I have a moment of your time?" The priest nodded. "This isn't the place for a discussion. Please, come down to the guest room and we can talk there." In the guest room, Mrs. Everin recounted the entire story. Throughout, the priest remained calm and composed. "I understand the situation now. What you and your child did before only addressed the surface issues. It was a temporary fix and didn't resolve the problem completely." Mrs. Everin asked. "Yes, but what does that mean?" "I still don't understand." Master explained, "Everything in this world has cause and effect. It is not by chance that the 2 mothers and their son have been following her son. This is a karmic connection from many lives ago. The 2 of them using violence to forcefully drive him away goes against the principles of cause and effect. Naturally, there won't be a happy ending." Mrs. Everin understood and asked further, "So what should we do now?" "Please, guide us." The master replied, "In this world, there are debts to be repaid. Until the 2 mothers pay off their debts, they will automatically let go. First of all, both mothers need to diligently recite the repentance sutras daily to reduce the karma they have accumulated in the past. Next, they must offer food to the 2 mothers daily and read sutras for their fast rebirth, so they can attain liberation soon. You both must be very patient. This method won't yield results overnight, but trust me, it is the only and most thorough way taught by the Buddha." Mrs. Everin and Andrew listened attentively. Mrs. Everin expressed her concern. "Yes, Master, I promise to follow your instructions. However, since this method is very slow, my son's health is already fragile. I'm worried that if this continues, he won't be able to endure it." The priest reassured her. "Don't worry about that. I promise you, from now on, these spirits will not dare to possess him again." The priest stood up, placing one hand on Andrew's head while making a hand gesture with the other, closing his eyes and softly murmuring something incomprehensible. The teacher said, "All right, you 2 should prepare the offerings mindfully. After that, you can feel reassured and go home. Remember to do exactly what I instructed, and everything will turn out well." Truly, according to what the monk said, Andrew no longer experienced sleep paralysis. Occasionally, he would still have nightmares, but their frequency gradually diminished. More than a month later, Everything had completely returned to normal as before. Once again, the mother and son rode to the temple to express their gratitude to the monk. Mrs. Evren prepared a significant amount of money, but the monk firmly declined. This is all due to the fact that you two have repaid your karma on your own. I haven't helped in any way to take credit for this. If you want to repay the kindness of the Buddha, your family should live with integrity from now on, do many good deeds, and know how to love and share. That is the true way to repay the kindness of the Buddha. Mrs. Evren and Andrew, deeply moved by the high virtue of the monk, clasped their hands in reverence and bowed deeply to thank him. Dear friends, the story, The Haunting Apartment by author Bram Stoker has wrapped up today's video. If you found this story interesting and useful, don't forget to support author Bram Stoker by hitting like and leaving a comment. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next exciting videos. Once again, thank you for your interest and for watching. Best regards, and see you in the next videos.